Domination is how we have typically seen dominion. And I understand how we get that twisted because we get it wrong. Because in the text, the actual word is rada.
Dynamic biblical discussions with special guests exploring tough biblical issues, academic scholarship, ethics, archaeology, textual criticism, Old Testament, New Testament, Bible interpretation, apocalyptic literature, Christian history, ancient Near East cultures. You're tuned in to Conversations with Pastor Cliff on Puluso Ministries.
Good day, everybody. Welcome back to another episode on Conversations with Pastor Cliff. And today I have a lovely guest. Her name is Lisa Sharon Harper, and she's a writer, activist, and a speaker. And she's also an artist. And we are going to be talking about her latest book, Fortune, how the race broke my family and how in the world and how to repair it all. Lisa, I know this book is very fantastic that you have written, and I believe we're going to have a wonderful conversations. And welcome to Puluso Ministries on Conversations with Pastor Cliff.
Thank you so much, Pastor Cliff. It's really an honor to be with you today, and also really awesome to be in conversation with your listeners. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Perhaps before we dive right into it, if you could perhaps give a brief background of who you are and what has led you to do what you are doing.
Sure. My name, again, is Lisa Sharon Harper. I am the president and founder of Freedom Road, a consulting group that is dedicated to shrinking the narrative gap in the world and in the church. And so what that means is that we fill in the gap between the stories that we tell ourselves about ourselves and how we got here, because it's that gap that causes the injustice to continue in every generation. So we believe that if we were to fill that gap, we would then be able to gain common understanding, common commitments, and then lead to common action in the world. So I'm also the writer of several books, including the most recent, The Very Good Gospel, which came out in 2016, and Fortune, which came out just this year in February. So I'm excited for it. I'm honored that you read it. Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you, Lisa. I mean, something that stood out to me, how race broke your family in particular and how it broke the world and ultimately how to repair it. And as I was reading through your book, as a beginning, I was captivated by how you trace back your family lineage, how they arrived in the United States, and how how to identify as to who you are and why you are the type of person that you are currently. And I find that it resonates with a lot of people, particularly myself as an African person living in South Africa. I find that what you've gone through in the United States, particularly in your family, resonates with a lot of people. And going back, they can actually trace who they are, but it doesn't only end there. They can learn how to actually make a difference in the world today and have a voice as to how these laws on race have actually fractured their families and actually also dissected the world in general. So am I correct in my assessment of your introduction in your book?
Yes, you are absolutely correct. I think one of the things that blew my mind the most in doing the research, it was 30 years of research, by the way, in my family. I had no intention of writing a book when I first started. I was just trying to figure out, who am I as an African-American woman? We and African-Americans have very little or have had in the past, very little resources to be able to trace back and to know who our ancestors are. There were actually laws passed that I found in the course of my research in the early 1700s and in the first colonies that said we're not going to document the births and deaths of anyone but people of European descent, white folk, because they like this literally the logic they gave for it is it's not worth it. So because there's no tracing of births and deaths, and then of course slaveocracy takes over. It is very, very hard to trace our lineage back. The only reason I was able to go back as far as I was to 1682 is because that particular line of my family traces back to a white woman. So because she was a white woman in Maryland, the colony of Maryland in 1682, and birthed a biracial child in 1687, Fortune, the book's namesake, because of that circumstance, she fell inside, right squarely inside of the first race laws in America. And so therefore Fortune ended up in court. So because of her court records, we were able to trace that family back. And actually then, because they were the first ones to get here, to be brought here, Sambo Game, who is Senegalese, we now know because Sambo is a Senegalese name, a Wolof name, and it's located mostly in the southeastern corner of Senegal, which makes sense because Game is not a name that was anywhere in the region where they lived. So we believe that it's actually they named him Gam after the Gambia River, very similar to the way that in South Africa, they would name people after the month of the year that their ancestors, like that they were brought to South Africa. So one of my good friends, Renee August, her last name is August because her ancestors were brought in August. Well, they did the same thing in America, but I was also struck that Sambo was his real name. They hadn't yet moved to the practice of actually renaming the people of African descent who were brought, the enslaved. So he lived his whole life with his actual name, Sambo, which means, of course, second son. That tells me something about his story. So yes, I realized with like dropped jaw, really surprised at how much we are all connected. And we're connected by two things. One, we are the same people. We are the same people. We were brought by the same powers, either south in Africa to South Africa or west to the Americas, and we were enslaved, or we were exploited or colonized throughout the continent. But it is that European age of conquest that unites us in experience, because it's the same actors who had the same MO, the same modus operandi around the entire world. So whether you go to the US or Puerto Rico or Brazil or South Africa or Australia, you find the same things, the same ways of operating that ended up impacting us all in very similar ways.
That's so interesting, Lisa. I picked up in your book that you actually go back to Plato and his student Socrates, about these hierarchical race construct that they came up with, and the white supremacy actually latched on that and went about to create all these racial laws that impacted us, particularly in South Africa and the United States, as you mentioned. And what is the significance of that? Classifying people based on race, and what are the repercussions of that?
Well, when you look back, in order to trace the history of race, which is one of the projects that I tried to do in order to figure out how did we get here, right? So in order to fix it, you got to know how it broke and when. And when I did that tracing, I discovered that the first Western philosopher to define or actually create this construct called race was Plato. And Plato did it in his book, The Republic. So he was trying to figure out, how does the Republic work? And he imagined that race is the different metals that different people groups are made of. And those different metals determine how they have been created to serve the Republic. So the people who are made of gold serve the Republic in this way, and the people who are made of iron serve the Republic in this way, and copper, and so on and so on. Now, it's debatable, and I don't think that he was actually thinking that people were actually made of metal, but it's a conceptual concept that reveals to us that he imagined race to be something that orders the world. So it didn't take long. It actually was 10 years later, his student Aristotle. So Aristotle, 10 years later, in his book on politics, writes, and actually the book is actually a compilation of his speeches, his lectures. He writes that if anyone has been conquered, any people group has been conquered, they have proven that they were created to be enslaved, right? So that was Aristotle took this racial construct, and then he's the one who inserted foreshore hierarchy into it. And he was of course looking at the barbarians. He said the barbarians were created to be enslaved to us. They are an inferior race, according to Aristotle. But now you flash forward about 1,000 years and you get Pope Nicholas V, who says, when a family friend comes to him and says, "Hey, Pope, I need a blessing. I'm going to go exploring." And the Pope says to him, "Okay, I'll give you a blessing, and I'll do you one better. If you come across land that is not civilized or Christianized, then you have the right to claim that land for the throne and to enslave its people." So that was what we now call the doctrine of discovery. It began as the Romanus Pontifex, and a papal bull issued in 1453. So you have this lineage, and it did not take long from there. So you had to skip forward 1,000 years to the Pope, but you only have to skip forward about 300 years to get. Now it's becoming embedded in science. So now you get Carl Linnaeus, the botanist, who decides one day, kingdom, phylum, class, family, order, family, genus, species. It works with fauna. Let's try it with humanity. And so what does he do? He puts himself on the top of the pecking order. He calls it White Europeanus. And then under that, Red Americanus, because I think at the time they had a Native American fetish, because they were bringing Native Americans to Europe, like Pocahontas and others. And then, and although Pocahontas was much earlier, but you understand what I'm saying. So, and then you have Yellow Asiaticus, and then on the bottom, he places Black Africanus. So now we've gone from philosophy to religion to science. And around that same time, actually a little bit before then, the colonies began to codify this race thing into law. So in 1662, the racial caste system that was developing in the first colony in the Americas, in the U.S., before it was the U.S., Virginia, they had a bunch of mixed race children running around because it was common practice for European men who were the planter class to rape their enslaved women, and they would then have their children. But the problem was in 1662, the colony was forcing them to recognize these children as their own and to have the children baptized. But according to English law, citizenship came through the line of the father and protected people from being enslaved. If you were a citizen, you could not be enslaved. And you also could not enslave another Christian. So Elizabeth Key took her case to court. She said, my father is an English citizen. My mother is an enslaved African woman. But because my father is an English citizen, I am an English citizen. And therefore, I cannot be enslaved. And he had me baptized. So I'm a Christian. So you really can't enslave me. So you know what they did? She won her case. They set her free. And then a slew of other people in that same circumstance, because there were a lot, came forward and fought their cases, and they were set free. So just 12 years later, that was actually in 1654. 12 years later, 1662, the Virginia House of Burgesses decides they want to stop this flow of enslaved people from leaving the plantations because it's their plantations that they're leaving. They're losing money. So they pass a law, and the law says that the immigration status, the citizenship status of the child will no longer follow the citizenship status of the father. Now it will follow the citizenship status of the mother. And then they say in perpetuity. And that's what created race-based slavery in America. 2 years later, Maryland, the colony where Fortune was born, passes its race law. And what they said, they had the opposite problem. They perceived the opposite problem. They still had the problem of white men raping enslaved Black women, but they didn't perceive that to be a problem. The problem they perceived was white women, indentured servants coming over from Ireland, and being Irish and also being Scots Irish, and falling in love with enslaved African men.
Wow.
and marrying them and having their children. And so therefore, again, creating this whole new class of people who are mixed race, who, of course, in South Africa, they called colored.
Mhm.
But here they just said, you know what, this is how we're going to solve this problem. In 1664, 2 years after Virginia, Maryland passed this law. If any white woman marries an enslaved black man and has children by him, she herself will be enslaved to her husband's master,
Wow.
and her children will be enslaved in perpetuity. She'll be enslaved until her husband dies. Her children will be enslaved in perpetuity. And there were white women who were enslaved um, because of that law. By the time Fortune stands in the courtroom in Maryland in 1705, the law has shaken out. It's actually changed. And
Mhm.
it's become that if your mother or your lineage traces back to a white woman, you cannot be enslaved.
Mhm.
But if in that equation your father was a man of African descent, you would definitely be indentured. So Fortune was indentured until she was 31 years old. And her two subsequent um, generations were also indentured. And I did a little DNA test, just basic ancestry.com. You can do matching with surnames. And I found the surnames of her indenturers in me.
Wow.
So that was a revelation that it was common practice for them to rape their indentured servants in
Wow.
order to produce more free labor for another 21 or 31 years.
Yeah, that's actually yeah, it's actually disheartening to actually hear about this. And it to me it sounds to something that I'm quite accustomed to in South Africa. When I read about history of South Africa, you realize that the oppressors did three things to oppress our people. Firstly, they're gonna civilize them. By that they mean you're gonna educate them, make them stop speaking their own native languages. Secondly, you're gonna Christianize them, and thirdly, you're
Mm-hmm.
gonna make them laborers, which is quite similar to making them slaves, as you put it in your book,
Very
particularly
much.
what we see in the United States. But tell me, Lisa, what is your take? Because I know you mentioned it quite a bit in your book about this whole image of God and having dominion, to subdue the earth. But I feel there's a bit of a misreading to a lot of people on how they've read the text to use it to destructively so to enslave our people. What do you
Yes,
think? Yeah.
exactly. I mean, when you look back at Pope Nicholas V, when he created that papal bull, he was referring back to the first page of the whole Bible, Genesis 1. And when he read that, he said to himself, those who are made in the image of God are the civilized ones, the Christian ones. And so, therefore, they are the ones who are created to exercise dominion in the world. But that is not what the text says.
Mm,
And the text is written by brown people who were enslaved at the time,
mm,
who were colonized at the time, and who were exiting that colonization and about to enter into their own rule in the temple. And as they were exiting that situation of enslavement, they decided to sit down and write commentary against their enslavers' worldview. And what they said was, all humanity is made in the image of God. All humanity is a marker of where God rules,
mm.
owned by God,
Yeah.
not other humans. And not only that, but imbued with the inherent dignity that we would normally give to a king or a queen, because up to that point, only kings and queens had the image of God seen to be inside of them. So now all humanity does. And what that means in the text, because it's all in the same breath, there's not even a period to the sentence between it, is that to be made in the image of God is not only to be human, but it is to be created with the call, the divine call, and the capacity to exercise dominion in the world.
Mm,
So when we govern in ways that cover over or twist or crush the image of God in the other, we are also actually we're doing war against God on earth, because the image of the king, according to the ancients, would not only have been a marker of where the king ruled, it would have been an indicator of the health of the kingdom. Wherever you saw smashed images, crushed or melted down images, you knew there was war against that king happening in or against the kingdom. So when we legislate or govern in ways that limit the capacity of other human beings to exercise dominion, stewardship of the world, make decisions that impact the world, either through poverty or oppression, then we are waging war against the image of God on earth, and therefore the kingdom of God on earth. So when Pope Nicholas V sounded off that edict, that papal bull, he did warfare against God. And that's what led to South Africa and the United States of America and all of South America and Vietnam and Australia and New Zealand. That's what led to the world as we know it, because of this bad read of Genesis 1.
And tell me, Lisa, because you bring out quite an important and significant points in your answer. What would you say is the difference between dominion and domination?
Oh, very good. Domination is how we have typically seen dominion. And I understand how we get that twisted, because we get it wrong. Because in the text, the actual word is rada. So rada literally means to tread down. So you would think, oh, that means to dominate. But no, the image is actually the image of the untamed wilderness, where vegetation is growing up all over the place. And so what God was saying is that God has actually called humanity to maintain the wellness of all of the relatedness between all created things. And you understand that it's the relatedness between things, because in the very end of that same chapter, God looks around and says, this is Tob Me'od, very good, hence the very good gospel, right? So Tob is the word good. And what that means, what the Hebrews would have understood, is Tob does not exist inside the thing. God was not saying that that's a very good walrus that I just made and a very good cloud that I just made up there. God was saying that the relationships between all of creation were very good, were overwhelmingly good. That word me'od means radically good. So it's the relatedness, the relationship between humanity and God, between all the genders, between us and the rest of creation, between all of creation, including us, and the systems that govern us. There were no cursing in the beginning on the first page of the Bible, only blessing. And part of what that blessing looked like was that we recognized and fanned the flames of the image of God in each other, letting each other, encouraging each other, making space for each other to exercise stewardship of the world together. That's what the first page of the Bible tells us is very good. And so when we think about sin, this is how it just changes everything for me. We think of, and usually have been taught by within our Western churches, that sin is missing the mark of perfection. Right? Have you heard that?
Yeah, I have heard that.
Yeah, of course, right? Yeah, missing sin is to miss them, because sin is a Greek word. And so therefore, in the Greeks, it literally measured the distance between the bullseye and the arrow. That's the sin. That's the missing the mark of perfection. But the problem is that we don't have a Greek faith. We have a Hebrew faith. And the Hebrews understood very goodness. What God says is very good. God's understanding of perfect as being the relationship between things is perfect. It's ethical. It's about how we live together in the world. So sin is no longer actually in the Hebrew, or never was in the Hebrew concept, the failure to be perfect. That's not even, they would never even think that's in God's sphere of concern, because God knows only God is perfect. God's not thinking we need to be perfect. God made us flesh, as in dust. We can't be perfect. We're not God. We are made in the image of God, in God's likeness. But that word likeness also is informative. It tells us we are like God, but it also says we are not God.
Yeah.
And so, what is sin then? Sin is anything that breaks any of the relationships that God declared very good in the very beginning.
To ensure that we keep bringing you tough conversations like these, please support our ministry by donating as little as 50 Rand per month. You can find our banking details on our website, hulusoministries.co.za.
I like that because I came across that in your book when you say, this very good phrase, tov me'od, is actually relational. And now, fast forwarding in your book, you talk about the process and the importance of telling the truth in the
Yes.
process of repairing. And when you look back, we know that, we cannot, if someone is not telling the truth or the oppressors are not telling the truth, we cannot move ahead into, and go forward into what has happened to us, those who have been oppressed in the past. And what do you say to that? What is the significance of that? Because I know many African Americans and South Africans in general have lost out generational wealth, what was done to them and what was robbed by these race laws that were implemented.
Mm-hmm. So I was in South Africa, again, actually called there by Reverend Renee August, who used to work with the warehouse right there in Cape Town. And she brought together 60 of her closest friends from all over the world, people who were doing justice all over the world, to spend 5 days on Robben Island.
Wow.
And I believe it was in January of 2017, I think, or January 2016, one of those two. And it was transformative for me. We stood over the lime quarry, the not the lime, but the quarry, where they would cut rock every day and move that rock. And it was futile work, which the scripture tells us work is supposed to serve us. It's supposed to build up our lives. It's supposed to give us what we need, but their work was futile. And it struck me that this is dehumanizing. What they were doing to the people on Robben Island was dehumanizing. And then it struck me, wait, the entire apartheid regime was dehumanizing.
Mm-hmm.
And the movement against the anti-apartheid movement was not just a movement for justice or just a movement against injustice. It was a resistance against dehumanization.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it was. It was a resistance movement against dehumanization.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why Mandela then called for forgiveness when he came out, because forgiveness is something only humans can do. But he also called for reparations, because reparations recognizes the break in the relatedness that we have. That's why the TRC didn't just have amnesty and also the truth telling, but it also included one of the three goals was reparations. Now, reparations includes restitution, and restitution requires that what was taken is given back. But I think that the most important piece of both reparations and restitution is that what needs to be restored is the right relationship. And in order to do that, you have to know what was the point of the break. And the point of the break in South Africa was the moment that those explorers or pirates or whatever came and landed in Cape Town and took the land, looked at them and said, according to Pope Nicholas V's edict in his papal bull, you are not called to exercise dominion here. We are. We then claim the right to take your land and enslave your people. That was the moment of the break. And so that moment, what it did was it failed to recognize your God-given call to exercise dominion over the land and your own lives and governance of your own people. That was the break. That was the moment. So repair must include the recognition of your own and the bowing to your own exercising of dominion over your own healing. So, like David does with the Gibeonites, who tried, who were victims of Saul, the previous king, who tried to commit genocide against them. David calls the Gibeonites while he has this big drought in the land, and he's trying to figure out, why do we have this drought? He calls the Gibeonites, and they say to him, "Mr. David, we have a bone to pick with you." And so they say to him, "Saul tried to kill us all. He wasn't supposed to do that. He tried to commit genocide." And so David does what we need to do. David says, "What do you say that we must do in order for things to be made well with you?" You see what he did?
Mm-hmm.
He made the relationship, the relatedness right again.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't assume that he knew. He
Mm-hmm.
didn't say, I'll talk to my people and get back to you about what we'll do.
Mm-hmm.
Right? He said, "What do you say?"
Yeah.
And guess what? We know how God feels about that, because God lifts the drought.
Yeah.
When David does it, they say it, he does it, God lifts the drought.
Fantastic. I mean, you bring out fantastic points, Lisa, about this relatedness and relational nuances in your book in particular. But you talk about the whole notion of reparation and repentance. And you say in your book that in South Africa specifically, that the oppressors actually confessed, but they actually never repented. And
That's right.
what are the consequences of that? For someone who is reading your book, whether it be a youth person looking at where they are standing now, whether it be instead of jobs or their future in general, what are the consequences of that?
So I want you to imagine that you have two children who are fighting over a toy that was given to them by their grandmother. Let's say it's two brothers, right? A younger brother, older brother. And the toy was given actually to the older brother. Let's say it's the older brother's birthday, right? So given by their grandmother. And but the two children get into a fight, and the younger brother beats him up and takes the toy. And then they sit down for dinner, and the younger brother holds the toy, saying it's his, at the table. And they're sitting there with their mom, their dad, and mom and dad don't do anything.
Hmm.
They don't intervene and say, "No, no, 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 that's not your toy. That toy belongs to your older brother. Give that toy back." What would that do to the relationship between these two brothers?
Of course, refracted.
Well,
Yeah.
yes, for life.
Yeah.
What would it teach the older brother about his value?
It's less of a maybe of a brother in the family.
Yes, yes. What would it teach the younger brother about his value in the family?
Yeah, they're superior and they much better than the older brother. That's basically what.
Exactly. Exactly. And he's then able to do whatever he wants with impunity,
Mhm.
right? Because nobody's ever going to hold him account. Now, in our situation, it's not our government that is the parent at the table. It's God.
Mm.
It's God. God is the one who gives the gift. God is the one who established the time and space of all of the nations. And it is the people of European descent who came and took the land, took the gift,
Mhm.
claimed it as their own. And so the question that we have to ask is, would God give restitution?
Mm.
If God is a good father, then God must.
Mm.
Because if God doesn't, then God is just like the parent at the table who does nothing when the two children fight. I mean, when one child takes the other's gift. Now, in the case of South Africa, what we see that reparation was one of the three goals, but it was never done.
Mm.
Restitution was never given on any wide scale. And as a result, what do we have? We still have, even though we have democracy, we have economic apartheid.
That's
We
true.
still have de facto economic apartheid. We have de facto Black townships. We have de facto colored townships. We still have de facto segregated land, segregated water, segregated air.
Mm.
And it's not only there, y'all got your idea from us.
Yeah.
We still have that too. We still have that too, because African Americans have never received reparations. We are the only people group in America that
Wow.
has experienced a federal oppression and never received federal reparations. And as a result, we still have economic apartheid, Jim Crow in our communities.
Wow, there's so many parallels between us and and the United States, particularly for Black African Americans. And tell me, you say in your book, Lisa, that without forgiveness there is no reconciliation.
Yeah.
And I ask you then, I mean, you have a lot of a bunch of younger folks running around in South Africa saying, why should I forgive my oppressors? What good would that do to me, for me, if I
Yeah.
do that type of thing? And what do you say to that? What is the significance of us as a people, letting go and, reconciling with our oppressors?
Well, the first thing is what I said earlier, which is the forgiveness is an act that only humans can do. So it is actually a humanizing act. It is something that that gives us the ability to claim the power that we have. When you have an oppressor who refuses or simply just doesn't even have any longer what they took, if they don't have the capacity to restore all that they took. Now remember, the chapter that comes before forgiveness is reparation. So
Yeah.
I'm not saying that we need to give folk a black blank check and just say, oh, never mind. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying they've got to pay reparation for that which they can. But for the things that can never be restored, for the communities that were slaughtered,
Mm.
for the family members that were lost, not only in apartheid, but also in de facto economic apartheid and poverty, right? Cancer, and other ailments that come because of environmental injustice, dumping on the lands, um, because of no access to health care, people dying of asthma because they don't have access to health care, and yet you're dumping toxins into their air.
Mm.
Um, you, these are the things that they can never be restored.
Mm.
In the Book of Lamentations, my friend Dr. Soon-Chan Ra, wrote a really amazing commentary on Lamentations. And in this commentary, he actually um, discerns that there's a kind of lamentation in the Book of Lamentations that is the dirge. It is the funeral dirge. It is the appropriate response when there is a dead body in the room.
Mm. Wow.
You don't stand there talking about how that dead body is going to rise again, because it's dead.
Mm. Wow.
And you have to recognize that it's dead,
Wow.
right? And so when we demand that our oppressor, our previous oppressor, and even current oppressor give back what they just don't even have. In my family, my great grandfather, Hiram Lawrence, ran north around 1910, after 1910. In 1910, there was a big, basically a pogrom against people of African descent in and around Rockport, Indiana, and that's where he lived. And it became a sundown state, a sundown town. And what that meant is the Black folk could not be in that town after dark. You were in the town after dark at risk of your own life. So he ran north to Philadelphia. As a result of that, he became a mail worker, a mail clerk in the post office, in one of the post offices in town. Over the next several decades, he actually worked his way up to be a supervisor in the central post office in Philadelphia. And as a result, his pay increased. And so he bought a whole block of homes. In other words, in this area called Elmwood, Philadelphia, he owned several homes all on one block.
Mm-hmm.
And the city of Philadelphia, or the state of Pennsylvania, one of the two, came in and snatched it by something that they call eminent domain. In other words, this is land that the state needs. And so we're going to take this from you, period.
Wow.
and we'll pay you pennies on the dollar for what it's worth. So he owned a block of homes and was only able to buy one home with the money that they gave him. And he had 3 generations living in one house
Wow.
in that home before they moved. And so what happens when that wealth is taken? It's not coming back.
Yeah.
What happens, especially when the community is smashed? The community cannot be restored. I
Mm.
could wave my fist at the state of Pennsylvania until the day I die, but they cannot restore the community that was taken from me.
Mm.
So if I do that, who benefits from that? I am the one who dies in a deficit.
Mhm.
The state of Pennsylvania is going to be fine.
Yeah.
So in order for me, for the sake of my health, for the sake of my mental health,
Mhm.
and also for the sake of me getting what I need, what I actually do need, which is community, which is that sense of ownership. I can release the state of Pennsylvania from their debt to me, which is that community that was lost.
Mm.
Now, they still owe the debt of the wealth that was accumulated or taken from my family. And
Mm.
I'm calling on them to pay those reparations. But that community will never be restored.
Yeah.
So I release them from that debt because they cannot repay it. And then what I do is I turn to God and I say, God, you are the one who has cattle on 1,000 hills. You are the one who turns the course of rivers. You are the one who moves mountains. For those who refuse to give what they can, the reparations they can, and for those who do not have what it is that they owe, Lord, you fill the debt. You do it. And guess what? It is God's good pleasure to give what God's children need. And so I am trusting that God, in God's time, in God's way, we're going to see that mountain move and we will get what we need. And in the meantime, I hold on to the community and I work toward truth telling and truth listening and seeking and reparation for the things that can be repaired.
Wow, that's a mouthful. I mean, Lisa. What I'm also getting here is, it's the striking similarities that our people have experienced down here, and many of them were moved from to the coastal areas, even the villages that they used to own, and pushed into the cities and to these small dwelling places to actually become laborers in
That's
South
right.
Africa in the mines specifically. So yeah, I'm picking that up. I mean, from your book, and also there's something that you say in your book also about the Lord's Prayer, which you mentioned quite a bit in your previous answer now, to say, giving us this daily bread. I mean, when Jesus is teaching his disciples how to pray. And tell me quickly, perhaps as we close, how would his listeners would have heard that in the context of the Roman Empire, the yoke of the Romans pushing down at them, and Caesar feeding them this bread as if he is God. How would they have received those words, and how are the words of Jesus revolutionary in how he actually teaches them how to pray?
We often think of the Roman Empire as being kind of like this inert thing, just this thing that was, kind of just gathered nations as if they had no will of their own. They just, okay, now Germany's going to be part of the Roman Empire. Okay, now Egypt, they tried to get Egypt, but of course Egypt said, hell no, right? And so said, no, we're not, we won't go, right? So,
Yeah.
but yeah, so we're just going to gather these places, Jerusalem, we're going to, you'll be part of the Roman. No, it wasn't like that. It was war. It was blood. It was death. And one of the things they did wherever they went was they spread salt on the land that they conquered so that the people would be dependent on them for sustenance. They could no longer grow their own food.
Mhm.
So what Caesar did, and was common practice in Jerusalem at the time, not just Jerusalem, but in throughout Israel at the time, was Caesar would have his centurions go through the streets on a cart, with a bunch of bread, and they would toss bread to the crowds. And I learned this by listening to a talk by Dr. Aubrey Hendricks, who is an incredible theologian here in the U.S. And Dr. Hendricks says that they tossed the bread to the crowds, and Caesar also told the people to call him Papa, and the name of the bread was their daily bread. This was their daily bread. So the hearers of that text would have known that Jesus was talking about Caesar here. Jesus was actually diametrically opposing the rule of Caesar, the way things worked in the Roman Empire. So when Jesus said, pray this way, he's actually saying, pray this subversive prayer, subvert the powers through this prayer. Our Papa in heaven, not Caesar. I'm praying, you are the most high God, because hallowed means most high, right? You are supreme. And that's actually, it's a direct reference to the first page of the Bible, to Genesis 1, where the name of God is supreme. And the context there is the enslavement of the people in Babylon or in Egypt, depending on who you think wrote that text. Doesn't matter. In either case, what they're saying is God is supreme over the gods of our oppressors. So now Jesus is saying to the Hebrews in the time of the Roman Empire, hallowed be your name, God. You are the supreme one over Caesar. Thy will be done. Your will, God, be done, not Caesar's, on earth as your will is done in heaven. So God, if people ask, does God care about what happens here on earth? Yes.
Yeah.
Jesus taught us to pray that God's will would be done here on earth. In other words, that the image of God, the kingdom of God, the reign of God would rule over the reign of our oppressors.
Fantastic. I like that, Lisa. I like that very much. Tommy, since we're running out of time, I've certainly enjoyed the book and I've been edified by your book. And, there's a line that struck me at the end, the African proverb that you actually cite from Archbishop Tutu, to say, I am because we are, the spirit of Ubuntu, I think carries on even to this day because of this communal emphasis that you place on people of African descent to actually stick together and speak the truth. I certainly enjoy that. And before I let you go, how can our viewers get hold of your books, and are there any other projects that you are working on? I know you have an online presence. Maybe you can give that a direction to your site for them to get hold of your resources.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, definitely read Fortune. Fortune, How Race Broke My Family and the World. It takes place on several continents, including Africa, as I go back and figure out where are my people from, and what does that mean. People can follow the work that I do at lisasharonharper.com. That's my personal website. That's where you want to have me speak. You can, fill out our speaking application there. Or if you'd like to engage with us, if you're an organization, an institute, or a business, and you would like to do some deeper work and you need a consultant, then Freedom Road is a consulting group, and we would love to work with you in order to move your organization deeper into becoming a racially equitable and just organization. And so freedomroad.us. It says US, but we say us. So freedomroad.us, because we really are beyond the US.
Yeah.
And then all the socials. So, and Twitter and Instagram and Facebook, you can find us there, both Freedom Road at Freedom Road Us on Twitter and Freedom Road.us on Facebook and Instagram.
Lisa S. Harper on Twitter and Instagram, and Lisa Sharon Harper.page on Facebook.
Well, Lisa, it's certainly been good having you on the show. And I hope our listeners have actually enjoyed this, and I certainly have. And until next time, I wish you all the best in the current work that you're doing. And I wish all our viewers can latch on some of the knowledge that you have gathered over the last 4 decades or so in doing research around enslavement of our people and the good news out of it. I thank you for that. And until next time, folks at home, stay healthy and may God continue to bless you. And thank you very much, Lisa. I hope we can have you again on the show.
Puluso Ministries is a non-profit educational enterprise founded in 2019. The ministry is informed by academic scholarship. At Puluso, we embrace multiple perspectives in our engagement with Scripture. We seek to provide non-Christians and Christians from all backgrounds and denominations with resources that provide an honest intellectual engagement with the Bible. We embrace multiple perspectives in fostering a more open, moderate society into the 21st century and beyond.
To ensure that we keep bringing you tough conversations like these, please support our ministry by donating as little as 50 Rand per month. You can find our banking details on our website, pulusoministries.co.za.